Imagine you're at a dinner party, the kind where the music is just a little too loud and the air is thick with people trying to curate the most impressive version of their lives. In one corner, there's a guy who's practically auditioning for a lead role in his own biopic, projecting his voice across the room to ensure everyone knows about his recent promotion, or that marathon he definitely finished. But then, you notice someone else. They're leaned against the kitchen counter, listening to a story with such genuine, undistracted intensity that the person speaking looks like they're the only soul in the universe. This person doesn't look like they're waiting for their turn to speak. They look like they're enjoying the silence between the sentences. When they finally do say something, it's not a proclamation. It's usually a short, insightful question or a dry, self-deprecating joke that lands with more impact than the loud guy's entire 30-minute monologue. That's the quietly confident person, and they are a psychological anomaly in a world that often mistakes volume for value. We've been conditioned to believe that confidence is a performance, a flashy cloak we put on to signal status to the tribe. We think it's about having the loudest roar or the most polished LinkedIn profile. But the psychology of quiet confidence is something much deeper, and frankly, much weirder than just being secure. It's a radical lack of self-monitoring, a term psychologists use to describe how much we change our behavior to fit a social image. While most people are walking around with a mental mirror in front of them, constantly checking if their hair is right or if they sound smart, the quietly confident person has smashed that mirror. They aren't looking at themselves through your eyes. This isn't because they're arrogant. It's because their sense of self is anchored so deeply that social feedback doesn't cause their internal tectonic plates to shift. Think about the last time you were truly wrong about something. Maybe it was a political take or a bit of trivia. Most of us feel a physical prickle of heat in our necks when we're corrected. It's our ego's threat detection system firing off. But have you ever seen someone just shrug and say, "Oh, wow, I didn't know that, thanks for telling me," with zero defensiveness? It's almost unsettling, isn't it? That's because quiet confidence is built on a foundation of intellectual humility. They don't view their identity as a collection of being right trophies. Instead, they view themselves as a work in progress. When you aren't trying to protect a fragile image of perfection, you don't have to defend your mistakes like they're a castle under siege. You can just let them be what they are, data points. This brings us to a fascinating quirk of their psychology, the way they handle praise. For most people, a compliment is like a hit of dopamine that fuels the engine for the next mile. But for the quietly confident, praise is often met with a polite nod and then quickly diverted. It's not that they're being fake humble. That's just another form of performance. It's that they have an internal validation loop. If you tell them they did a great job on a project, they already knew if it was good or not because they measured it against their own internal standard before they even showed it to you. Your approval is a nice garnish, but it's not the main course. This internal locus of control is what makes them so resilient. If the world suddenly decided they were uncool, they'd probably just keep doing exactly what they're doing, perhaps with a bit more free time on their hands. Let's talk about the long pause. You know that moment in a conversation where the air goes thin and everyone scrambles to fill the silence? The quietly confident person is the one who lets that silence sit there like a guest at the table. They don't feel the frantic, jittery need to perform social upkeep. In psychology, this is often linked to a high threshold for ambiguity tolerance. They are comfortable with the unknown and the unspoken. While everyone else is throwing word confetti into the air to mask their discomfort, the quietly confident person is using that silence to observe. They're reading the room's micro-expressions, the tone of voice, the things that aren't being said. They've realized a secret that most of us forget. The person who speaks the least often has the most information. There's also this strange, specific behavior they exhibit, which I like to call the stealth pivot. Have you ever noticed how some people can take a conversation that's headed toward a nasty argument and, with just a few words, turn it into a calm discussion? They don't do it by dominating, they do it by refusing to escalate. Their nervous systems are remarkably well regulated. When someone attacks them or gets aggressive, their amygdala hijack, that lizard brain fight or flight response, doesn't trigger as easily. They see your anger not as a threat to their ego, but as a reflection of your own internal state. It's like they have an invisible psychological shield made of sheer indifference to drama. They aren't cold, they're just not sticky. Conflict doesn't stick to them because they don't give it any hooks to grab onto. This leads into their preference for low-stakes environments. You might find a quietly confident person who is a CEO or a leader, but you'll rarely find them in the middle of a vanity project. They often gravitate toward hobbies or lifestyles that provide flow rather than fame. They might spend their weekends restoring old watches, gardening, or writing code for an open-source project, tasks where the reward is the mastery itself, not the applause at the end. There's a beautiful term in Japanese culture called wabi-sabi, which finds beauty in imperfection and simplicity. Quietly confident people are the human embodiment of wabi-sabi. They don't need the gold plating. They're happy with the raw wood, as long as the structure is sound. If we look at the neuroscience of this, it's often about the strength of the connection between the prefrontal cortex, the logical thinking part of our brain, and the amygdala. In people with high, quiet confidence, this top-down regulation is incredibly efficient. They can feel the impulse to brag, the impulse to get angry, or the impulse to hide, and they can simply choose not to. It's a form of emotional autonomy that looks like a superpower from the outside. They aren't slaves to their impulses. While the rest of us are being tossed around by the waves of our emotions, they're sitting in a boat they built themselves, occasionally checking the weather, but never panicking about the tide. One of the most unusual life experiences many of these people share is a history of purposeful isolation. At some point in their lives, they usually spent a significant amount of time alone, not because they were outcasts, but because they wanted to see who they were when no one was watching. Whether it was a solo backpacking trip, a year of deep study, or just a childhood spent as a loner by choice, this period allowed them to decouple their identity from social approval. They learned that the world doesn't end if you aren't the center of attention. In fact, they learned that the world gets much more interesting when you stop trying to be the center of it. You'll also notice that they have a very specific way of holding space for others. Because they aren't worried about their own status, they have an enormous capacity for empathy. They don't listen to your problems so they can give you advice that makes them look smart. They listen so you can hear yourself. It's a rare gift. In a society that is increasingly narcissistic and loud, being a container for someone else's thoughts is a radical act of love. They don't need to suck the oxygen out of the room, they provide the oxygen. So, where does this leave you? Maybe you've spent your life feeling like you need to lean in, speak up, and be the loudest person in the room just to be noticed. Maybe you've felt that gnawing anxiety that if you aren't constantly asserting your value, you'll disappear. But the psychology of quiet confidence suggests that the most powerful version of you isn't the one that's shouting. It's the version of you that is so comfortable in your own skin that you don't even feel the need to mention it. Confidence isn't the absence of fear or the presence of certainty. It's the belief that you are enough regardless of the outcome. It's the realization that your value isn't a stock price that fluctuates with the opinions of others. It's a fixed asset. When you start to view yourself this way, you'll find that you stop trying to win conversations and start trying to understand them. You'll stop trying to impress people and start trying to connect with them, and ironically, that's when people start paying the most attention. Take a look at your own life this week. Where are you performing? Where are you filling the silence just because the quiet feels heavy? Try just for a day to lean into that quietly confident energy. Listen more than you speak. Admit when you don't know something. Let someone else take the credit for a small thing. See how it feels to have nothing to prove. You might find that the quiet isn't empty at all. It's actually where your real strength has been waiting for you all along. If this resonates with you, or if you've met someone who embodies this quiet power, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. We spend so much time studying the loud, let's take a moment to learn from the silent. Would you like me to write a similar deep dive script on the psychology of high-functioning loneliness, or perhaps explore the neurobiology of intuition?